Throughout this pandemic, we've all experienced social isolation and loneliness to some degree, but seniors, whether they live at home or in a care community, were extra isolated due to the higher risks associated with COVID-19. This is a topic that hits home for a lot of us, including Monique and Lori. Now, my parents, they're tough. They had each other, but Monique, I heard your mom was living on her own. So how did she cope with the isolation?
Hi, Tracy. It was a really scary time. My mom downsized to a condo a few years ago, and that condo has a high percentage of seniors that live there. So that daily camaraderie that she would have with her neighbors, it evaporated because it was a ghost town. So she wasn't seeing anybody, and she wasn't leaving her apartment. Not only that, she lives a stone throws away from the retirement facilities that had COVID-19 outbreaks. And this was extremely triggering for her because she used to work in a long-term care facility. So she was getting daily calls from former colleagues who were telling her that this person had passed, this resident passed, this nurse has passed. And it just became really overwhelming for her. And she was in a state of mourning, and the walls were closing in. And it got to a point where the daily calls were no longer helping. And I could see my mom sort of fading away. So my husband and I made a decision when the pandemic hit. It was to bring her into our home. We rented out her condo. We have a backyard that she could enjoy. We have a little cute puppy that she adores, and her spirits have been raised up since. But throughout it all, we learned that being with us and being in a community, even if it's just with our puppy and Poochie, it was okay for her.
I've seen Poochie. Poochie would raise my spirits too. What a cutie. But I love that you were able to have your mom's back like that, because what a tough time, right?
Yeah.
In my situation, I know my parents have each other, but they're not that tech savvy. I mean, my dad is, Mummy not so much. So what we had to do was figure out a way to sort of lay eyes on them once a week. And we've continued the tradition. So we go there every Saturday. In the winter, when we couldn't go inside, we stayed on the front porch. We do a little food exchange because my mom is constantly cooking. That's how she shows love. And so I feel like my biggest fear was I did not want them to get ill and end up in hospital. The hospital resources were strained. And so I did not want my parents to end up in that situation. And that's sort of where most of the stress came from, and not being able to sort of, it was the phone and sort of our weekly visit. But at some point, it feels like it's just not enough. So Lori, I'm going to move on to you now. I imagine this pandemic has been hard because your parents are in Florida, aren't they?
So in the winter, they're in Florida, and I am too, but on different coasts. So they live in a community where, again, there's a lot of elderly, and my parents are in their 80s, but they're really active. And I think one of the scariest things is when this happened and my mother said to me, we're not going to live through this. We're not going to make it. Like, they were really afraid, and that was frightening to me. But we weren't allowed to go into their community. We weren't allowed to go see them. We did what you did, though, and while my parents are sort of tech savvy, they had a little trouble getting the Zoom thing going, so we would help them, especially my sister. But every Friday, it would be my sister and her family, my family and my parents, and then my mom's sister would join and my cousins. So that kept us connected. But, we did what we had to do to make sure that they stayed safe. Thank goodness now they've both been vaccinated. They've gotten their boosters. They're in New Jersey now, heading back to Florida soon, and their community recently closed again because in Florida, the rates are high again.
Yeah, you know what a great way to figure it out. And every family was trying to figure out what mix was going to work. So Lori, that's good to hear. I mean, I'm happy they've got their vaccines and their boosters. It is so hard to be removed from our parents, but we do have a few tips to make things easier. We have Home Instead's gerontologist and caregiver advocate, Dr. Lakelyn Hogan, here to talk about what we can do to help. So Dr. Lakelyn, welcome. What are the impacts that loneliness and isolation have on older adults, and what are some signs to watch out for?
Hi, Tracy. Thanks for having me. Isolation and loneliness among the older adult population existed before COVID was ever part of our everyday vernacular. And it will continue to be an issue for them, even though we're all starting to kind of go about to our normal life, quote unquote. But isolation and loneliness, while they are used interchangeably, isolation is when we physically don't have enough people to come in contact with, while loneliness is more of a subjective term. You don't feel like you're having quality interactions. So it's important as we assess our loved ones' needs that they're having quality interaction, that they're feeling connected. But we're seeing the negative impacts of isolation and loneliness among the aging population in the areas of mental, physical, and emotional health. You may have heard the statistic that isolation is as detrimental to our health as smoking 16 cigarettes a day. And that's a startling statistic, but we do know that it is increasing your risk for things like heart disease, stroke, dementia, even increased mortality. So we want to watch out for signs in our loved ones, such as dietary issues. Maybe your loved one isn't eating as much as they once were. Maybe they're eating too much to kind of fill that loneliness void. Physical symptoms. Are there aches and pains that they're experiencing? Changes in their mental health. Maybe there's more anxiety, paranoia. Also, if there's changes in their appearance, maybe they were always a sharp dresser. Now they're really having trouble getting up and out of bed, getting dressed for the day. That could be an important sign to look out for. Same with low energy and sleep issues. So it's important for all of us to be in the know of those signs so that if we see those in our loved ones, we can address them promptly.
You know, it's tough to know because so many of us were sort of like out of sorts and sleeping too much and eating too much. So you really got to keep a keen eye on our loved ones so you know what might be a bit off. Now listen, the worst of the pandemic may be over, I hope. But we can't forget about the brutal lessons it taught us about the importance of caring for our senior loved ones. With both World Mental Health Day and Thanksgiving approaching, I hear there are many ways you can give back to the seniors in your life and community. What can we do?
Well, there are several things we can do. At Home Instead, we have this great program called Ready to Care that inspires small acts of kindness to do for aging loved ones in your family, in your community, one of which is a pen pal program where you can write a letter to a senior, share your contact information, and interact. What a great way to reduce loneliness. And then also you could hire a professional caregiver from Home Instead. One of our core services is companionship, being those eyes and ears for family that maybe live far away. It really can do a lot to reduce isolation and loneliness. And then also just to create those regular social interactions. It sounds like all of you ladies have done that with your loved ones throughout the pandemic. But another great way to do that is to just share a meal with your loved one. We know at Home Instead that if an older adult shares a meal with someone, they eat a more nutritious meal. What a great way to provide nourishment for the body and the soul. So those are just a few quick tips to brighten someone's day, reduce isolation and loneliness, and give back.
Those are good tips. Thank you so much for those, Dr. Lakelyn. And thank you, Monique and Lori, for sharing your stories. For more ideas and information on how to give a little extra love to the isolated seniors in your life, go to our website, cityline.tv.